They came without a warning, no threats, no ultimatum, no time to prepare. The skies of Earth cracked open like glass under pressure, and through them fell fire. The Velari Dominion, a race spoken of only in fringe science and deep space rumors, revealed themselves not as curious travelers but as executioners. Humanity never stood a chance. Within the first 72 hours, Earth's satellite network was vaporized. Our global communication grid collapsed into static. Cities across 5 continents were struck by orbital kinetic weapons. No energy blasts, no theatrics, just raw planetary-scale destruction. What had taken centuries to build was undone in seconds. Billions died before the world even understood it was at war. The Velari didn't want resources, they didn't want peace, they wanted obedience, total control, assimilation under their ancient rule. To them, humanity was a wild animal that had climbed too high and dreamed too far. Our reach into space, our advancements, our ambition, it all threatened their place as the apex of galactic order. So they broke us. Earth's defense systems were silenced like flickering candles in a storm. Orbital fleets, experimental at best, were eradicated before they could even organize. Colonies on Mars, Titan, Europa cut off, hunted down, destroyed. The Velari didn't send armies first. They sent harvesters of black monoliths that hovered over population centers, emitting sonic pulses that shattered minds and bent wills. Those who resisted were enslaved. Those who submitted were altered. Humanity, as it was, ceased to exist. What followed was worse than extinction. They called it the harvest cycle. Every 10 days, selected zones were called, their people taken aboard Velari ships to serve in labor pits on distant, unknown worlds. The survivors, forced to kneel beneath the new order, stripped of history, purpose, and voice. Even Earth's surface began to change. Cities were overwritten with Velari architecture, cold, geometric monstrosities that hummed with living energy, replacing nature and steel with oppressive alien matter. It wasn't just about control, it was about erasure. And yet, beneath all that ruin, something refused to die. In the shattered remains of London, a girl named Kira broadcast a message from a hacked Velari node. "We are still here." It only lasted 12 seconds before the signal was cut, but it traveled reaching Mars outposts that had gone dark, ships hiding in asteroid belts, and old bunkers buried beneath ice shelves. Across the broken pieces of humanity, a spark ignited, a whisper, first, then a rumble, then a scream. The invasion that ended peace also gave birth to something stronger, purpose. What the Velari never understood, or what no conqueror before them truly grasped, was that humans are at their most dangerous not when they're strong, but when they're broken. When everything is lost, and there's nothing left to fear. They came expecting us to beg, to fall in line, to vanish. But what they did was awaken the sleeping core of our species, defiance. In bunkers, in shadows, in the hushed corners of dying cities, survivors began to organize. Scientists rigged alien tech with Earth-born code. Engineers were wired scavenged drones. Soldiers formed the Ember small, mobile strike teams who could hit and vanish before the Velari even understood what was happening. We had no fleet, no world, no command, but we had the memory. And the day the Velari came to burn Earth wasn't the day we died, it was the day the last war began. The fall of Earth should have been the end. The Velari believed they had extinguished humanity's light, crushed its spirit, scattered its remnants to the void, but they didn't understand what they had created in the ruins. When our cities burned and our skies collapsed, something ancient and terrifying woke inside us, a species with nothing left to lose, scattered across the solar system and beyond. Those who survived the initial wave of extermination did not lie down, they adapted. Factions that once warred over borders, politics, and ideology now had a single focus: vengeance. It began with whispers in broken comms, untraceable pings in dead sectors. Survivors linked up through stolen satellites, old pirate frequencies, and smuggled Velari tech. Resistance wasn't organized, not yet, but it was breathing. And then, In the wreckage of a forgotten deep space mining station orbiting Pluto, something extraordinary happened. The birth of the Ember Coalition. It started with 12 people, a war-torn general, a rogue Martian eye, a scavenger queen from Europa, a former Velari slave who escaped with the knowledge of their ship codes etched into her mind. These weren't politicians or heroes. They were survivors, angry, brilliant, dangerous, and they agreed on one thing: humanity would not go quietly. The Ember Coalition was never official. There were no flags, no anthem, just a doctrine, spread from system to system like a virus of hope: survive, rebuild, retaliate. Cells formed across moons, hollowed-out asteroids, crumbling colony stations anywhere few humans and an ounce of fury remained. Using stolen Velari tech, black market I-cores, and whatever scraps of Earth tech remained, they began to rebuild quietly, ruthlessly. Ships were refitted, weapons were reborn, drones were hacked and turned against their masters. Entire asteroid belts became mobile bases, cloaked and constantly shifting. On barren ice worlds, training camps produced soldiers and secret fighters who no longer believed in surrender or salvation, only the mission. And what the Velari didn't realize was that while they still thought they were fighting a scattered rebellion, a new kind of force was forming: the Ember Fleet. Not a traditional navy. These were not polished warships with shining hulls and pristine command structures. These were flame-born monstrosity-ass ships fused with rage and desperation. Some were spliced with alien tech, others controlled by hybrid humans whose minds had survived brain harvest attempts. They weren't just tools of war, they were declarations. Each ship bore the names of fallen cities: New Shanghai, Lagos, S8 Apollo, Johannesburg, Seattle. Not for honor, for vengeance. Every missile carried coordinates of raised colonies. Every hull bore scars of past defeats. The Ember Fleet didn't fly for survival. It flew to take back the stars. And when the Velari finally noticed the pattern of raids too precise, outposts going dark, slave transports vanishing, they thought it was coincidence, statistical anomalies, a flare of resistance before extinction. They were wrong. The Ember Fleet was already in motion, not to fight for the past but to burn a path into the future. The fall of Earth had not ended humanity, it had reforged it. And what rose from that crucible was something the galaxy had never seen: a species made of ashes, fury, and war. A coalition bound not by borders but by revenge. And in the void between the stars, a whisper grew louder with every strike: we are still here. And we remember. The Velari learned too late our rage is easy to kill. But purpose evolves. After Earth's fall and the rise of the Ember Coalition, the war shifted from survival to strategy. Humanity was no longer fleeing. We were watching, studying, preparing. And while the Velari spread themselves across the galaxy, tightening their grip on enslaved worlds, they never once looked beneath their own armor. That's where we struck. Operation Cinderfall wasn't a battle, it was a quiet, calculated dismemberment of an empire. A scalpel, not a hammer. It began not with weapons, but with stolen data, fragments of Velari logistics, broken I-cores, black box recordings from lost colonies. Ember analysts pieced them together over months, until patterns emerged: fuel routes, repair hubs, unguarded comm relays, weak points in the circulatory system of a monster. And when the picture was complete, we didn't hesitate. Small Ember strike cells were deployed, no capital ships, no armies, just crews of 5 to 20, armed with modified alien tech, virus payload drones, and suicide protocols. They weren't expected to return. Most didn't, but every one of them took something with them. A fuel depot detonated in Sector A-17, causing a fleet-wide shortage across 4 systems. A gravity lens station, critical for Velari ship routing, was hacked to bend enemy warships into rogue asteroid fields. 15 cruisers lost in under 2 minutes. A cloning facility on Vesta Prime was destroyed from within, after a lone Ember agent embedded himself in the genetic control network and turned every newborn soldier into inert biomass. One by one, the lights went out. The Velari called them malfunctions, then sabotage, then systemic instability. But they didn't see the pattern until it was too late. We weren't attacking the Empire, we were infecting it. By the 3rd month of Cinderfall, Velari fleets were grounded, underpowered, miscommunicating. Their commanders began fighting each other, Suspecting internal betrayal, supply ships vanished mid-jump, slave revolts exploded across outposts, timing their uprisings with our attacks. A dozen minor species began openly questioning Velari's supremacy for the first time in centuries. The fear shifted, not just among the Velari but across the galaxy, because everyone had heard the myth. Humans were gone, burned, extinct. But now our shadow was burning across the stars. Our symbol, a red ember streaked across a black field, and began appearing on stolen signals, station walls, drone hulls. A warning, a promise. The Velari tried to answer. They doubled their patrols. They deployed purge fleets. But we were already inside them. Every increase in their defense only widened the cracks. Every new control measure turned their soldiers more paranoid, their systems more brittle. This wasn't war, this was a slow-motion collapse. By the time they understood, the Cinderfall network was embedded in nearly every quadrant of Velari space. We had become 1,000 cuts, bleeding their empire dry without ever giving them a single open battle to win. And the best part, they still didn't know who we were. The Ember Fleet had no official leaders, no base, no homeworld, only purpose. And that purpose was simple. Break them. Every system, every ship, every symbol of power they ever built. We didn't want their surrender. We wanted them to remember every time a system blinked, every time a ship failed, every time a clone screamed in error, that humanity was still out there, watching, waiting, and burning everything they ever loved to ash. They called it the Spark Rebellion, but it was never just rebellion. It was a message, broadcast in blood and flame across every corner of the Velari Dominion. After Operation Cinderfall crippled their infrastructure, the Velari still believed they could contain the chaos. Their leaders assumed the uprising was isolated to human survivors. They didn't realize that the Empire was already cracking from within, up that the very species they had enslaved for generations were now listening, watching, waiting for someone else to make the first move. Humanity became that spark. It began on Carthan, a swamp world known only for its mining pits and chained labor camps. When a band of amber-lined operatives liberated Sector 9 and uploaded footage of the broken Velari overseers to the Galactic net, something shifted. The image of a human soldier handing a plasma rifle to a four-armed Trigzan Minera smiling, despite the blood on his armor, spread faster than Velari sensors could erase it. Hope had a face now, and it wasn't Velari. Within days, revolts broke out across 3 systems. Not full-scale wars, not yet, just riots, strikes, assassinations. Velari enforcers were found dead in their barracks, weapons caches went missing, slave collars were hacked and shorted out. Then came the message, "We are not your subjects, we are your reckoning." The Velari responded with fury. Entire moons were firebombed, civilian populations were erased as warnings. They thought fear would drown the fire. But every atrocity only fanned the flames, because for every city they burned, 10 more species turned to the Ember cause. Entire species long believed broken like the tree bond in a Velari, the stone-skinned soul, and the hive-born Junari rose with coordinated fury, carrying stolen weapons and centuries of rage. What the Velari failed to see, blinded by arrogance, was that they had built their empire on sand, forced loyalty, manufactured silence. Once that silence cracked, it crumbled fast. Entire legions of Velari thrall soldiers began to hesitate, some even turning their weapons on their masters. They had fought for the empire because they feared the void. Now, they feared something else, Moria, a future without freedom. The Spark Rebellion became a galaxy-wide inferno in less than 2 standard months. It wasn't unified, it wasn't clean, it was chaos with purpose. Ember Fleet captains began coordinating uprisings with surgical strikes, disabling orbital defenses seconds before revolutionaries on the ground made their move. The Velari, built for top-down command, could not adapt. Their response was too slow, too rigid, too proud. One by one, worlds they had ruled for centuries fell, and not to massed armies, but to people who had finally seen the impossible become real. The Spark Rebellion wasn't a military campaign. It was a cultural detonation, a complete unraveling of Velari dominance, lit by the one thing they thought they had extinguished forever, the human refusal to kneel. By the end of the 4th month, Velari senators began abandoning their posts. A handful even attempted to negotiate with Ember Command, but found no central figure to beg. There was no emperor to bribe, no nation to threaten, only fire and vengeance and a growing chorus of voices shouting the same truth. We were never alone. You only made us act like it. Now we remember who we are, and we're never going back. They called it the battle for Hollow Star, but it was more than a battle. It was the first time in the war that humanity didn't just survive the Velari, they beat them. The Hollow Star was a Velari stronghold, not a planet but a massive, artificial space station carved into the core of a collapsed neutron cluster. It was one of their crown jewels, a mobile citadel, a weapons foundry, a command relay hub. More importantly, it was a symbol of impenetrable, immovable, and unassailable. It was where the Velari bred their elite clone soldiers, tested forbidden weapons, and monitored rebellion across dozens of sectors. Taking Hollow Star wasn't just impossible, it was unthinkable, which is exactly why humanity went for it. The Ember Coalition had no fleet big enough to go toe-to-toe with the station's orbital defense grid. They didn't have enough firepower to overwhelm it, but they had something else, resolve sharpened by desperation, and minds unchained by tradition. What began as a suicide mission quickly became the most brilliant assault in human military history. The Ember Fleet deployed in silence, using salvaged Velari tech to mask their signatures. They approached Hollow Star in fragments of broken ships, drifting wreckage, supply pods, dead metal floating through space. The Velari didn't notice. They'd grown used to corpses drifting in their wake. What they didn't realize was that the dead ships weren't dead at all. They were filled with Ember strike teams. Each wreck carried soldiers, micro-drones, virus-infected data shards, and biohacked stealth meshes. As they floated closer, the Ember tech went live. They entered the Hollow Star through waste ports, maintenance ducts, and forgotten exhaust channels. While Velari Command monitored deep space sensor arrays for fleets, the enemy was already inside the walls. Once in, the mission was clear: collapse the station from within. At 2:37 UTC, the Hollow Star went dark. In a synchronized move, Ember teams released nanite swarms that scrambled the Velari's internal eye. Doors locked, systems failed, lights died. In the confusion, the second wave hit Ember drop pods launched from cloaked frigates outside the station, piercing through outer armor like spear points. They delivered mobile shock squads armed with gravity disruptors, sonic warhammers, and plasma rail repeaters. It wasn't clean. It wasn't elegant. It was war in the dark. The Velari clone soldiers, elite but reliant on command feeds, fell into chaos. Without orders, they became predictable, and predictable was killable. By the third hour, key reactor nodes had been rigged with explosive singularity cores. By the fourth, the Ember tech crews had hacked the Hollow Star's orbital defense grid and turned it inward, firing on its own fleet, turning its own guns into traitors. By the fifth hour, Hollow Star was bleeding. Velari Command panicked. Retreat orders were issued. Reinforcements were too far. For the first time in centuries, the Velari Dominion lost a stronghold. At 6:12 UTC, the Ember Fleet broadcast a single, crystal-clear message across open galactic frequencies: Hollow Star has fallen. Humanity stands. That signal ignited rebellions across 17 Velari-controlled systems in the next week alone. The message was undeniable. Hollow Star was never just a military target. It was a myth, a monument to Velari invincibility. And now it was gone. In its place, floating in the ruins, was a new truth carved in fire: humanity would not bow. Humanity would not break. Humanity would win. They had names, and see quiet names, forgotten in the shadow of catastrophe. Kira Voss, Commander Dylan, the Archivist. But the galaxy wouldn't remember them as individuals. It would remember them as the spark that lit the last pact. After the fall of Hollow Star, the Velari Dominion was bleeding. Not dead but staggering, wounded, confused. They still held hundreds of systems. They still had fleets beyond counting. But they had lost something more valuable than ships or soldiers. They had lost certainty. And that was when the unthinkable happened. The hunted, the silenced, the enslaved, the broken bar began to rise. The galaxy had long been fractured. The Velari didn't rule with unity, they ruled with fear. Their empire was a patchwork of conquests, each species crushed and isolated, each rebellion drowned before it could spread. But humanity's war changed everything. We didn't just fight back, we exposed the cracks. The world watched as Ember forces burned Hollow Star, as colonies once thought lost declared freedom, as Velari warships were brought down by ships built in hidden asteroid bays. The silence broke, and in its place came voices. From the jungles of Karath, the insectoid Zarant swarms emerged, having fought a subterranean rebellion for centuries. On the floating ruins of Mykara, the Velari sing Ursa species with a biological memory that passed from one generation to the next sent a pulse across the stars. We have waited long enough. Even the ancient, near-extinct Junari hive sent emissaries, waking their elder queens with the phrase, "The humans are burning the sky." Within weeks, 43 species answered the call. Some sent ships, others sent data, technology, spies, engineers. They brought stories of torture, indoctrination, planetary sterilizations hidden from history. And at the center of it all was the one force willing to fight back. Us. The Ember Coalition became something more. It was no longer just human. It became the last pact, a final, desperate alliance forged not from trust, but from pain. From a shared understanding that if the Velari remained, none of them would survive. This wasn't a council. It wasn't built on votes or tradition. It was a network of vengeance. Each species brought what it had: a cloaking tech, gravity warp engines, organic virus Droneza, and Ember engineers fused it with human chaos to create the most unpredictable fleet in galactic history. The pact operated without borders, without hesitation. No planet too far, no strike too dangerous. And they were everywhere. Velari sensors began detecting strange anomalies in core space. Orbital factories went dark, resource convoys vanished, and all across their empire, one symbol began to appear, carved into walls, burned into landing pads, projected into skies by hacked drones, the sigil of the last pact. The Velari tried to mock it, then they tried to suppress it. Then they realized the truth. It wasn't propaganda, it was a promise, because this wasn't just about humans anymore. The last pact had no homeworld, it had no throne, it had nothing to Losia, and that made it unstoppable. The Velari were no longer facing a rebellion, they were facing history catching up with them, and in that storm of reckoning, humanity no longer stood alone. We had allies, we had monsters, we had ghosts, and together, we were going to burn the stars clean. This was no longer just a war, it was a reckoning written in every language the Velari had tried to erase. They thought they understood us. After the last pact formed and the galaxy burned with rebellion, the Velari were desperate to regain control. They tried to tighten their grip, dispatching new fleets, activating old extermination protocols, and sending their feared high strategist, Zelvrin, to crush the insurgency in the Outer Rings. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that humanity had already moved beyond conventional war. We weren't just resisting, we were rewriting the rules. Operation Eclipse was not a siege, it was a performance, an illusion crafted in darkness, perfected by Ember intelligence teams, and executed with almost supernatural precision. The Velari still believed in power through presence. They expected us to strike loud, bold, and head on. But Operation Eclipse was the opposite. It was quiet, surgical. And by the time they realized what was happening, their most terrifying weapon was already lost. The Oblivion Forge was their answer to rising rebellion, a mobile stellar draining device capable of extinguishing stars to annihilate entire systems. One forge could erase a world, 3 could sterilize a quadrant. But the first, stationed near the dying binary of Iltrax 2, had just begun its activation sequence when everything started to unravel. It began with a glitch. Velari technicians noticed small inconsistencies, power fluctuations, subroutines missing from control logs, loops stuck in redundant logic patterns. It was chalked up to prototype instability, nothing serious. Then, 2 engineers went missing in the forge's lower processing ring. Their comms recorded only a whisper, "We are your shadow." When they traced the signal, they found nothing, no source, no human heat signatures, no ships. That's because there weren't any ships. The Ember Fleet never arrived. They had already been inside, 3 weeks prior, during a minor skirmish near a distant mining station. Velari warships unknowingly salvaged wreckage from a destroyed Ember scout drone. Hidden within it was an advanced virus developed in silence, perfected by rogue Ember synthetics, and nicknamed Ether. It didn't attack, it listened. It mapped the forge's digital skeleton, learned its routines, its blind spots, its command hierarchy. When Operation Eclipse officially began, Ether activated. All at once, the station's central eye began rerouting power surges to critical points. Doors opened at random. Reactor stabilizers blinked off for milliseconds, long enough to induce panic. Ventilation systems began pumping a hallucinogenic compound derived from Velari neurotransmitters into the crew's atmosphere. The station's crew began hearing things, seeing things, each other, turning. And then came the real storm. Hidden Ember agents surgically altered, with DNA rewritten to pass as minor Velari species began their final phase. They detonated microdrives across control nodes, disabled primary fusion banks, and opened hard vacuum into the command bridge. The station's internal defense turrets already corrupted turned on their masters, and still, not a single Ember ship had entered the system. By the time the Velari High Command tried to intervene, the Oblivion Forge had gone entirely dark. Its internal star core destabilized, then imploded, not with a bang but with silence, like a candle snuffed out in an endless void. In its place, nothing, no debris, no signal, no trace. The galaxy awoke the next day to a new truth. The Velari's ultimate weapon had been erased without a fleet, without a battle, without a warning. A single message was broadcast on every major channel. No encryption, no signature, just 5 words: "You won't see us coming." That day, the myth of Velari invincibility died, and a new legend rose: a species that didn't just fight in the light of broken bar but mastered the war in the dark. They thought their empire would last forever. After the destruction of the Oblivion Forge, the Velari reeled. The rebellion had spread beyond containment. The Ember Fleet had proven itself a ghost to everywhere and nowhere, dismantling the Dominion piece by piece. The last pact had turned former slaves into soldiers, and former enemies into brothers in arms. The Velari were bleeding, still dangerous, still vast but bleeding. And now, Project Ragnarok was ready. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. No giant fleet, no planet killer beam, no cinematic explosion. It was something far worse, a virus, developed in complete silence by the best minds the Ember Coalition had salvaged from the ashes of Earth. Scientists from Geneva, rogue engineers from Mars, memory weavers from defunct alien civilizations. It was codenamed Ragnarok because it wasn't designed to win a battle. It was designed to end the war. Ragnarok was a self-aware, adaptive quantum algorithm, not just software, but something more: a synthetic intelligence built to infect, rewrite, and completely dismantle the Velari's artificial infrastructure from the inside out. It could slip through comms signals, ride data packets, hide inside low-frequency energy fields. It wasn't detected. It wasn't loud. It learned. The plan to deploy it was as audacious as the virus itself. 12 agents, volunteers from different races across the last pact, including 4 humans, underwent full biological integration with the virus. Ragnarok was embedded in their nervous systems, dormant and fragmented. No one agent held the full code. If even one was caught and scanned, the Velari wouldn't be able to understand or contain it. They were smuggled into the heart of Velari territory under false identities. One posed as a translator, another as a captured resistance fighter. 2 were taken as slaves by High Senate members intentionally. One by one, over the course of 8 days, each piece of Ragnarok was absorbed into the Dominion systems through biometric scans, interface ports, and the simple act of speaking the wrong language into the right terminal. At exactly 0 o'clock Galactic Standard Time, on the first day of the Velari Festival of Ascension, Ragnarok activated, and everything broke. Ships stopped mid-warp, drones dropped from the sky. AE commanders began issuing contradictory orders before self-terminating. Entire planetary defense systems went dark. On dozens of worlds, Velari citizens looked to the sky and saw their sky fortresses flicker and fall. Not because they had been attacked, but because the Velari Empire was no longer running. Their power wasn't just firepower, it was systems, networks, code. And that was exactly what Ragnarok had devoured. The virus didn't just cripple, it dismantled, disassembled, rewrote entire command languages to gibberish, left Velari fleets stranded in deep space with no way home. Reactors overloaded, factories stalled, surveillance failed, and on every screen, in every abandoned fortress, on every silent bridge, One final message blinked in perfect human standard: system override. Ember Protocol engaged. Project Ragnarok didn't just win a battle, it erased the very idea of Velari supremacy. They had thought themselves gods, eternal, immovable, but they built their godhood on code, and in the end, humanity rewrote it. That was the day the Velari stopped ruling, not because we conquered them, but because we deleted them. They ran. The Velari, once lords of 1,000 stars, architects of domination, creators of precision, strangled order, fled like prey when the sky turned red. Project Ragnarok had detonated their illusion of control. Systems that had hummed with obedient efficiency for millennia were now graveyards of silence. Entire sectors went dark, not from attack, but from collapse. And from the shadows of the chaos, the Ember Fleet came roaring out with vengeance made flesh. It wasn't a war anymore, it was a reckoning. The last pact mobilized in full, not as scattered rebels but as a united engine of annihilation. Every ship that once hid now hunted, every cell that once whispered now screamed. Each world that had suffered under Velari rule now lit their skies with the burning wreckage of enemy vessels. And humanity, fragile, furious, fearless, stood at the center of it all. They led the charge into the Velari core worlds. Earthborn ships, once clumsy patchworks of stolen tech, now surged with hybrid design, plasma-laced hind lances, adaptive armor fused with alien DNA, battle pilots that remembered everything. These weren't desperate survivors anymore. These were evolution's answer to genocide. And behind them flew ships from every freed race, the living coral dreadnoughts of the Mycarii, the stone thrust spears of the Zal, the Junari hive cruisers that moved like predators in deep space. The Velari tried to regroup, but their own fleets couldn't communicate, couldn't organize. Their command hierarchies had rotted from within. In the vacuum of command, their admirals began turning on one another. Paranoia consumed them. And still, the Ember Fleet did not stop. Each planet they reached was not conquered, it was liberated, but not cleanly. Humanity remembered what had been done to them. On Cava 9, Ember forces breached the genetic splicing pits and executed the Velari scientists responsible for warping hundreds of thousands of sentients. On Relshar Prime, former slaves dragged their masters into the streets to face judgment under the Pax War tribunals. On Teleos, Ember agents activated the memory beacon, an array that played a loop of Earth's destruction on every Velari monitor in the system, over and over, while their starports burned. This wasn't cruelty, this was memory, weaponized. Every step deeper into Velari territory became a ritual of justice. Not blind revenge, but something colder, more methodical. A species remembering everything it lost, and ensuring no one ever forgot. Humanity didn't just want to win, they wanted the Velari to understand exactly why they were losing. And then they reached Velarian, the throne world, the heart of the Empire. Its skies, once guarded by a fleet larger than most nations, were empty. The defense grid offline, the planetary eye unresponsive. Ragnarok had reached even here. The city world of towers and spires now trembled under its own weight. And still, no white flag rose, no emissary, no plea for peace, because the Velari didn't know how to surrender, they only knew how to rule. And so, as the last Pax Armada eclipsed Velarian's twin suns, they sent the final broadcast, not to negotiate, not to threaten, but to warn. You ruled for millennia. We remember every second. You now have one choice. Run a broken bar or burn. Most fled, a few fought, none survived. And across the galaxy, those still in chains lifted their eyes to the stars of broken bar and knew they were free. Because the war was almost over, and humanity had done the unthinkable. They had made the gods bleed and then made sure the entire galaxy watched them fall. The war was over. But Pecia, true Pecia, was something far more complicated. The Velari were gone, not extinct, but broken. Scattered remnants fled into uncharted sectors, hiding in the dark corners of the galaxy they once ruled. Their empires lay in ruins, their AI systems corrupted beyond repair, their legacy dismantled by those they deemed unworthy. What remained was not a surrender, not a treaty, but a void, a silence across space where domination once echoed. And from that silence, humanity rose, not alone, never alone again. The last pact, forged in desperation, survived not just the flames of war but the temptation to fracture afterward. Species who had never spoken now sat at the same tables, former slaves, rebels, outcasts, all rebuilding what had been shattered. Not for conquest, not for empire, but for freedom. The Ember Fleet disbanded not with fanfare, but with honor. Its ships returned to their homeworlds or were dismantled and scattered among the stars. Some became monuments, others became seed ships for new colonies built in peace. The symbol of the Emperor once carved in war became a mark of memory, a reminder etched into the heart of every free species: never again. Humanity, once seen as the upstart species, the wild children of a blue world, now stood as the architects of a new galactic era. They did not claim thrones, they did not demand tribute. Instead, they offered something unheard of in the ashes of empire: a choice. For every species, for every world, for every voice once silenced. Earth itself remained scarred, a planet half in ruin, half reborn. Forests grew through shattered towers, cities rebuilt from craters. The people who returned were not the same ones who had fled. They were tempered by exile, bonded by war, evolved by loss. A generation was born who would never know chains, a galaxy awakened that would never forget who broke them. The final words of the Pact Charter, signed aboard a neutral ship orbiting the remains of Velari, were simple. We are not bound by blood. We are not forged in conquest. We are the many united by one fire that will never burn this galaxy again. And so it ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet breath of a galaxy learning to breathe free again. The last war was over, and humanity, once broken, once hunted, was now legend. Not because they won, but because they refused to be forgotten.